Okay, I hit go live. There we are. We are live. Is it on YouTube? I'm looking now. Okay. Um, Hello, I'm Connecting Consciousness. My name is Athena. I'm the Ohio coordinator. And we're honored to have a fellow CC member, Robert Schwartz, who is an author and hypnotherapist, and he'll be presenting his work today. Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Athena. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
To you, it's, it's showing live in chat now on YouTube.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and start. I still don't see anybody, but that's okay. So thank you all for being here with us this evening. As you know, my name is Rob Schwartz. I'm the author of 3 books, Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, and Your Soul's Love. The premise of which is that we ourselves plan our lives, including our biggest challenges, before we are born, before we come into body. And in the books, I tell the true stories of a number of different people. It's all case studies who planned very common life challenges, all the most common challenges we face here in the Earth School. And by working with some gifted mediums and channels, and also through the form of hypnosis I practice, which is called a between lives soul regression, I tell the stories of why they planned these challenges before they were born. So I apologize if there's a little motion in my screen. I'm doing the call on my phone. The website is yoursoulsplan.com. And if you go there, you can read large portions of all 3 books for free. Take a look at the sessions page to find out about the Between Lives Soul Regression, and the events page to find out about the upcoming online workshops. So what I would like to do this evening is start by telling you a little bit about myself, my own spiritual journey, and how I came to write 3 books about this rather unusual subject. And then I'll share with you what I found in my research, the 5 main reasons why we ourselves planned our biggest challenges before we were born. And then I'll share with you 1 or 2 stories of pre-birth planning, make some concluding remarks, and then take some questions. So who am I and how did I come to write 3 books about this unusual subject? Well, for me, the path to writing the 3 books started in Chicago back in the year 2003. And at that time, I was actually self-employed as a marketing and communications consultant, basically doing different forms of corporate writing. I have a background that I think is atypical for the author of New Age books. I have an MBA. I was in the corporate world for a number of years. And so back in 2003, I was doing this corporate writing, which I found to be very, very unfulfilling. I used to say to people at the time that I had the feeling if I fell off the face of the earth, my clients would hardly even notice. They would just plug somebody else into that role and carry right along. But at the same time, I had this feeling that there was some kind of calling or purpose for my life, but I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't even sure how to figure out what it was. Now, it's important for you to understand that I come from a very conventional background. I grew up in a conventional suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. I come from a conventional family. They might not like that description, but I think we were. And I have a conventional education based on the scientific method. So back in 2003, when I was having what you could call an existential crisis about my life, my first attempts to resolve it were very conventional in nature. The first thing I did was just to go for career counseling. And I took a test that probably some of you are familiar with called the Myers-Briggs Inventory. Found out that I'm an INFJ personality type. And while that was interesting, it didn't tell me what to do with my life. So then I went to all my friends and family and I said, you know, I'm really unhappy doing this corporate work. I feel like I should be doing something else. What do you think I should do with my life? That, it turns out, is not a good question to ever ask another person. About half the people I asked literally shrugged their shoulders and said, I don't know. And the other half suggested that I do whatever they were doing for a living, which, as you can imagine, was really not tremendously helpful. So when that didn't shed any light on the matter, I thought, okay, I've got to think outside the box here. What can I do to figure out my soul's plan, so to speak? And this idea came to me, go see a psychic medium. Now, coming as I did from such a conventional background, mediumship is not part of that background. I wasn't even sure if I believed in mediumship, but nothing else was working. And I thought, why not? I'll invest an hour of my time, a little bit of money, and if nothing comes out of it, there's no harm done. So I did this on May 7 of 2003. I had my first session ever with a psychic medium. The reason I remember that date is that this was the day on which my life changed. The medium said to me right out of the box at the beginning of the session, your spirit guides are here. And I said, what is a spirit guide? I'd actually never heard the term before. She said, well, a spirit guide is a highly evolved non-physical being with whom we plan our lives before we're born and who guides us after we get here. And then she said, your guides would like to talk to you. And she started to channel them. And right away, they said to me, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born. And I'll tell you, I just shook my head and I said, why in the world would I have done that? And they said, well, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. Now, coming as I did from such a conventional background, I probably would have dismissed all of this as some kind of delusion on my part, except that the guides then launched into this very lengthy and detailed discussion of my challenges and why I had planned them. And what was really compelling about this was that they knew what all of my challenges had been without me telling them anything about myself, nor had I told the medium anything about myself prior to the session. So, as you can imagine, if you're talking to beings who know literally everything about you without you telling them anything, that gives them a lot of credibility. So when they launched into this idea of pre-birth planning, I was listening very, very closely. Now, I can't overstate to you the impact that this perspective had on me. In the days and weeks after the session with the medium, I thought about this constantly. And the effect that it had was that it created quite a deep healing because it allowed me for the first time in my life to see a deeper meaning or a deeper purpose to the most challenging things that had happened. And then I thought, well, if this perspective can create this kind of healing for me, then surely it can create the similar kind of healing for other people. And that was when I first started to think about writing a book on the subject. Now, within a very short time of the session with the medium, I started for the first time in my life to have spiritual experiences of my own. And I don't have time this evening to share all of them with you, but I want to share one that to this day is still the single most profound spiritual experience I've ever had. And it had a big impact on the development of the books and the work I do now. Within just a few weeks of the session with the medium, I was home in my apartment in Evanston, Illinois, where I lived at the time. It was a weekday, middle of the afternoon, and I was doing this corporate writing. And I decided just to take a break and go for a walk. So I'm walking down the sidewalk in Evanston, Illinois, when all of a sudden I was overcome by this feeling of overwhelming unconditional love for every person I saw. And when I say unconditional love here, I don't mean the kind of love you might feel for a parent or a child or a romantic partner. This was an experience of divine love. It was a transcendent experience. I remember it very clearly because the first person I saw after this feeling came over me was a cab driver. He was just sitting behind the wheel of his cab waiting for a customer to come along. And I looked at this man, who of course was a total stranger to me, and just felt pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for him. And then I looked up and I saw a man's barber shop on the corner. I looked through the window and I saw the barber cutting a customer's hair. Again, two total strangers, but as I looked at them, there was this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love. And then I turned around and I saw a young woman, a mother, pushing an infant in a stroller down the sidewalk. And again, as I looked at them, there was this feeling of just pure, divine love. Everywhere I looked, every time I saw another person, this feeling washed over me. Now, I had never heard of anything like this or read about anything like this, but I understood intuitively what was happening, which was I was in some form of enhanced immediate communion with my own soul. In other words, my soul was saying to me, this love is who you really are. This is your true nature. And I believe that my soul gifted me with that experience that day because much later, after I had researched many people's pre-birth plans for the books, what I discovered is that every plan is based on great wisdom and complete unconditional love for all involved. This is true even when great challenges are being planned. This is true even when quote unquote negative roles are being scripted for people. It's always based on great wisdom and complete unconditional love for everybody involved. If I had not had that experience of my soul as unconditional love walking down the street that day, I would still have found this same result in my research. But I think there would always have been this little voice at the back of my head saying, how do you know this is true? How do you know that the life plan is based on unconditional love? Well, I know it's true because of that experience walking down the sidewalk that day. That experience showed me that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. And it's because of that experience that I can sit before you tonight and say to you that we are made from the energy of unconditional love. And every pre-birth plan is based on unconditional love, because that's the knowing that came to me as I had that experience walking down the street that day. Now, within a short time of that experience, something else very important happened in terms of the development of the books and the work I went on to do. At this point, I had started to think about writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born, but I had no idea how to research such a book. So I had been attending meetings of the Chicago IANDS chapter. IANDS, IANDS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, is a group for people who have had near-death experiences. I myself have not had one, but I think it's a fascinating subject, and so out of personal interest, I had been going to their meetings. Not long after the session with the medium, and not long after the experience of my soul as unconditional love, I went to the woman who runs the Chicago IANDS chapter, and I said to her, Diane, I'm thinking of writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born, but I don't have any idea how to research such a book. Do you have any suggestions for me? And she said, Rob, there's a woman in our group here who you absolutely have to talk to. She introduced me to a woman who has the ability to go into trance and channel her own soul, her own higher self. So I said to her, I'm thinking of writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born. May I interview your soul? And fortunately for me, she said yes. She and I got together 5 times for a total of about 15 hours. And in this 15 hours of channeling, this huge volume of information came forward that in many ways served as the foundation for all the books I went on to write. Her soul told me in detail how pre-birth planning works, which challenges had been discussed for her, which challenges had been chosen and why, which challenges had not been chosen and why not. And so again, this huge volume of information came forward that really served as the foundation for everything I went on to do from that point. So there were 3 pivotal events that all occurred within a short time of each other. The session with the medium, my experience of myself, my soul as unconditional love, and this woman's channeling of her soul. These 3 things happened within a short time of each other, and combined, they gave me the push I needed to say, okay, I will leave the corporate world and attempt to write a book about how we plan our lives before we're born. Now, when I made that decision, of course, the first question I had to answer was, how in the world am I going to find out what somebody planned before they were born? Despite the very successful session I had had with a medium on my own, it actually never occurred to me at that point that there are mediums and channels who can access this kind of information. The thought I had was, well, we've got the internet now. There must be people somewhere in the world who actually remember planning their current lifetime. I'll use the internet to find them. So I went online, I went to every spirituality message board I could find, and I posted a notice saying, author, writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born. If you remember planning your life, please contact me. Well, I started to get thousands of emails from people all over the world, and not a single one of these people remembered planning their current lifetime. they were writing in with stories about past lives on Earth, past lives on other planets, non-physical lifetimes. And these were fascinating stories. For example, there was a woman who recalled being an aquatic animal on what she referred to as the blue planet, which apparently was completely covered with water. But not a single one of thousands of people remembered planning their current lifetime. This went on for months. Finally, I began to despair of ever being able to write a book on this subject, and it was at that point I said a very important prayer. I said, "Dear God, if you want me to write a book on this subject, I will do it, but I need a little help here." And wouldn't you know it, within a very short time of making that request of the universe, I just happened to come into contact with several very gifted mediums and channels who, in one way or another, could find out what somebody planned before they were born. One of them has the ability to go into somebody's pre-birth planning session and hear the conversation that took place when that person was planning their life and their challenges. So we were able to hear people talking to their future parents, children, friends, employers, teachers, enemies, if they were planning to have enemies. And I put these conversations verbatim into all three of my books. Another one of the mediums is very gifted at talking to the deceased. So if I was interviewing somebody for one of the books whose life challenge involved somebody who's now back on the other side, we would work with her. She would call in the deceased loved one, and I would ask that person directly, what did you plan with this other person, and why did you make those plans? Another one of the mediums is very gifted at channeling a person's higher self, a person's soul. That gave me the extraordinary opportunity to talk to people's souls directly and again ask what was planned and why. And then another one of the mediums is very gifted at channeling angels, some of whom serve as guides to people once they come into body. And in working with her, I could speak to the angels directly and again ask what was planned and why. Now, those are the four mediums and channels in the first book, Your Soul's Plan. In the second book, Your Soul's Gift, there are two new colleagues, a channel in Michigan who channels an ascended master named Aaron. Aaron has access to the Akashic Record, which you may know is the complete non-physical record of every word, thought, and action relevant to the earth plane, including the pre-birth planning. So I could speak with Aaron. He could go into the Akashic Record of whoever I was talking to and find out what challenges had been planned and why had they been planned. And then the other new colleague in Your Soul's Gift, the second book, is a channel in the Netherlands who channels Jesus. That gave me the remarkable opportunity to speak with Jesus directly and again ask, what did this person plan and why did he or she make those plans? Now, in the third book, Your Soul's Love, that book, unlike the first two, is a combination of sessions with mediums and channels and the specific form of hypnosis I practice, which is called a between lives soul regression. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But in this book, which was focused on the pre-birth planning of challenges related to romantic relationships, it's a combination of mediums and channels and the between lives soul regression. So the format that the research took for the books is that I would interview somebody about a common life challenge. And it's all the most common sorts of things we face here on Earth: physical illness, mental illness, accidents, abusive relationships, deafness, blindness, drug addiction, alcoholism, all kinds of challenges in romantic relationships. If it's a common life challenge, it's probably in one of the three books. And then the person that I interviewed about a particular challenge would have 1, 2, or sometimes 3 sessions with the mediums in which we would ask Spirit, did this person plan this experience before he or she was born? And if so, why? And then in the books, I present all the information that came through. In the third book, Your Soul's Love, where I started to incorporate the hypnosis that I do, in a between lives soul regression, the people I was interviewing for the book would talk to a group known as the Council of Elders. These are the very wise, loving, and highly evolved beings who oversee reincarnation on Earth. And they know everything about everyone. They know your life plan for this lifetime. They know about every past life you've ever had. So people would speak to the Council of Elders and they would ask, what did I plan? Why did I make those plans? How am I doing in terms of fulfilling my plan? And how can I better fulfill my plan? Those are the four main questions people ask when they get to the Council of Elders. But you can ask them any question on any subject, and if it's for your highest good to know the answer, they will tell you. So people often come out of a between lives soul regression, and they will say things like, they answered every question I asked about my life. I have no more questions about my life. So it's potentially a life-changing experience. But in a nutshell, that is how the books came to be. So the intentions of the work are, number one, to help people awaken, by which I mean come into some awareness that you are more than your body, more than your personality, more than your thoughts, more than your feelings. You are, in fact, an eternal divine soul. You know, the body, the thoughts, the feelings, the personality, these are things you have, things you carry through a lifetime. But just because you have a thing, that doesn't mean you are the thing you have. For example, if you have a horse, that obviously doesn't mean that you are a horse. And by the same token, just because you have a body, a personality, thoughts, and feelings, that doesn't mean you are those things. You're not. You are the soul. Those are things you have or carry through a lifetime. So the first intention is to help people awaken into that kind of awareness. A second intention of the work is to help people understand the deeper spiritual meaning and purpose of their biggest challenges. And a third intention is to help people heal from their biggest challenges. The understanding of the deeper spiritual meaning and purpose is a large part of the healing. So in brief, that's how the books came to be. Now let me share with you what I found in the research for the books, 5 main reasons why we ourselves plan big challenges before we're born. If you're going to take notes, this would be the part to take notes on. The first main reason I have seen in my research for planning big challenges before we come into body is balancing and releasing karma. Balancing and releasing karma are not the same thing. Balancing karma means you plan to have a new experience that energetically offsets a previous experience. Releasing karma means you heal the underlying tendency that created the karma in the first place. In other words, if all you do is balance karma without also releasing it, you will end up recreating the same karma over and over again. Let me give you a simple example of balancing karma. Let's say that there are 2 people who had a past life together in which one was ill and the other person was that person's caregiver. When those 2 people transition back into spirit and have their life review, as we all do, they may or may not have a sense of unbalanced energy around that relationship. In other words, they may feel complete with it, they also may not. If they feel complete with it, as I understand it, there is no karma. But if they feel incomplete with that relationship, the feeling of incompletion is the karma. So let's say they feel that way, what can they then do to balance the karma? Well, the easiest, simplest, and most direct thing to do is simply to trade places. So now the one who was ill plans the life challenge of caregiving. The one who was the caregiver plans the life challenge of illness. What makes all of this so interesting and so challenging, I think, is that when those 2 souls get back into body, they won't remember the pre-birth plan just as the rest of us don't. So the challenge becomes, how do we give and receive love unconditionally in these very difficult circumstances of self-induced amnesia? And when I talk about giving and receiving love unconditionally, you know the flow of love in the world is circular in nature. If you cut that circle in half the circle is giving love to other people. This is what we all try to do, and we all believe this is a good thing to do. But it's actually only half the circle. The other half of that circle is receiving love from other people. So if you are someone who does not allow others to give love to you, you're actually blocking the flow of love in the world just as effectively as if you never give love to anyone else. And this, I think, is particularly relevant in a caregiving situation because, in my view, it's incumbent upon the one who is ill to receive love from the caregiver. But that's reason number one for planning big challenges before we're born, balancing and releasing karma. The second main reason I have seen in my work for planning challenges before birth is healing. Now, let me share with you a story from the first book, Your Soul's Plan, that will illustrate this. In Your Soul's Plan, there's a chapter about the pre-birth planning of deafness and blindness. The deafness story is about a young African-American woman named Penelope. She was 24 at the time I spoke with her for the book. Penelope was born completely deaf in both ears. She and I worked with the medium who can go into people's pre-birth planning sessions. Her name is Stacy. Now, because of Penelope's deafness, this particular session, unlike all the others I did for the books, was conducted online by Instant Messenger. So Penelope is in her home typing on IM. I'm in my home typing on IM. Stacy is in her home typing on Instant Messenger. Stacy goes into Penelope's pre-birth planning session, and she hears the conversation that took place when the deafness was born. And what we discover in this conversation is that in the lifetime immediately prior to this one, Penelope had the same mother she has in this lifetime. And in that past life, when she was a little girl, she heard her mother shot to death by the mother's boyfriend. Now, she didn't actually witness the murder, but she heard the gunshots that led to her mother's death. So you can imagine she was quite traumatized by that, so much so that it led her to commit suicide later in that lifetime. So Penelope returned to spirit from that lifetime with what you could call an energy of unhealed trauma, which now needs to be healed. In her pre-birth planning session, her spirit guide says to her, "My dear, would you prefer to be born deaf so that no similar trauma will happen to you again, and so that you can complete your healing from the last lifetime?" And Penelope responds, "Yes, that is what I want and what I wish to do." And then what follows is a fascinating dialogue in which she and her guide work out the details of the deafness. Just as an aside here, her pre-birth choice to be completely deaf, female, and African American was not random or arbitrary in any way. One of her pre-birth intentions was to cultivate greater compassion. And she felt that this relatively unusual combination of being completely deaf, female, and African American would put her in a lot of situations that would provide both the opportunity and the motivation to cultivate compassion. And in fact, that is exactly what she did. She took all of her experiences as a deaf person, a woman, and an African American, used them to cultivate tremendous compassion, and now she offers that compassion to her students. She's a teacher in the deaf community. But this is reason number two for planning big challenges before we're born, healing. The third main reason I have seen in my work for planning challenges before birth is a desire to be of service to others. If you read spiritual or metaphysical literature, you've probably heard of the concept of oneness. This is the idea that there's actually only one being in existence in the universe. And it's you, it's me, it's all of us. Each of us is an individualized expression of the one. The way I understand the orientation towards service, which is in literally every single pre-birth plan I've ever looked at, it's always there in some form or another to one degree or another, is that this orientation towards service stems from oneness consciousness, which is our natural state of consciousness when we're home on the other side. In other words, let's say that you and I are back on the other side and we're planning an incarnation together. And you experience that I am literally you. It's not just an intellectual concept the way it is here. You actually experience that I am you. Well, then, of course, you will want to be of service to me. And conversely, if I experience that you are literally me, then, of course, I will want to be of service to you. So again, I think this orientation towards service, which is in everybody's pre-birth plan, is a natural expression of oneness consciousness, which is our natural state of consciousness when we're home on the other side. So that's reason number three, a desire to be of service to others. The fourth main reason I've seen for planning challenges before birth, and this I think is probably the big one out of the five, is a desire to experience contrast. And let me explain what I mean by this. I shared with you earlier my experience of my soul as unconditional love as I was walking down the street that day. The non-physical realm we come from, as I understand it, is a realm of complete unconditional love. So if we are made from the energy of unconditional love, which was my experience walking down the street that day, and we are in this realm of only unconditional love, that means we experience no contrast to ourselves, which in turn means we don't fully understand or fully appreciate who we are. We don't fully understand what it means to be a being made from the energy of unconditional love. So I think what the soul is doing here on the physical plane is that we have come for the experience of what you could call the not love, which we would all agree there's a lot of, because through that experience, by the time you go home at the end of an incarnation, you understand much more profoundly what it means to be a being made from the energy of unconditional love. In other words, you now have a more profound self-knowing. Now, I realize this is a somewhat arcane concept. So to make it more accessible, I like to borrow an analogy from a book other than one of my own. In the Conversation with God books by Neale Donald Walsch, which probably many of you are familiar with, this idea of experiencing contrast comes up, and God asks Neale to explain it using the analogy of the white room, which goes like this. Imagine that you are a white being in a white room. So you are white, the ceiling is white, the floor is white, all the walls around you are white. Everything in this room is white, including you. Now, if you are such a being in such a room, how do you know that you're white? The answer is you don't. And in fact, you can't until you experience something that is other than white. Then once you've had that experience, then you understand much more deeply what it means to be a white being in a white room. This, I think, is what we as souls are doing here on the physical plane. We are love. We are in this realm of only love. We therefore don't fully understand or appreciate who or what we are. And so we come for the contrast, the not love, because through the experience of the contrast, by the time you go home at the end of an incarnation, you understand much more deeply who and what you are. So that's reason number 4 for planning big challenges before birth, a desire to experience contrast. The fifth and final reason for planning big challenges before we're born, strictly speaking, is a subset of number 2, healing, but it's so important I like to break it out as a separate item of its own. And that is healing or correcting false beliefs or false feelings about the self. And let me explain how this one works. Almost everybody has had at least one past life, if not many, in which certain things happened that caused you to pick up a false belief or a false feeling about yourself. By false, I mean false from the perspective of your soul. 2 of the most common false beliefs or feelings about self are 1, that one is powerless, and 2, that one is unworthy or perhaps even worthless. If you feel or believe yourself to be powerless, unworthy, or worthless, to your soul that feels discordant. What do I mean by discordant? Well, imagine if you were to walk through an old abandoned house that's filled with spider webs. And you walk through a spider web and it clings to your face, it clings to your neck, it clings to your chest and shoulders. To you, this would feel, for lack of a better word, icky, and you would immediately try to brush or clear the cobweb away. Very roughly speaking, that's how it feels to your soul if you, the personality, a portion of your soul's energy in a physical body, pick up a false belief or a false feeling. It feels icky or discordant, and your soul wants to heal or correct the false feeling or belief. So how is that done? Well, here in the 3rd dimension where we are, what will happen is you will magnetize to yourself experiences that seem on the surface to confirm the false feeling or false belief. This is actually a fundamental function of life in the third dimension. The world is set up to mirror you back to you so that you can discover what lies within your consciousness, even if it's at the subconscious level, and then bring it to the light of conscious awareness where you can then set about healing it. So you will draw to yourself experiences that seem to confirm that you are powerless, unworthy, or worthless. Now, I realize that what I have just described might sound harsh and perhaps even punitive, but I can assure you it is not the universe's intention to be either harsh or punitive. The universe is loving, and what it's trying to do in its infinite love for you is mirror you back to you so that you can find out what lies within your consciousness. And if there's something there that's in need of healing, bring it to the light of conscious awareness so that you can set about healing it. So that's reason number 5 for planning big challenges before we're born: healing or correcting false feelings or false beliefs about the self. Let me share with you a couple of true stories about pre-birth planning. Then I'll make some concluding remarks and take some questions. Probably many of you know the name Edgar Cayce. For those of you who have not heard the name, Cayce, who is now back on the other side, is widely regarded as perhaps the greatest American psychic medium who ever lived. Late in Cayce's career, after he had done sessions for thousands and thousands of people, he was visited by 2 wealthy women, sisters from New York City. And the sisters said to him, "Mr. Cayce, we are at the end of our rope in regard to our brother. He lives under a bridge in New York. He drinks too much. We come from a wealthy family, but he long ago squandered his share of the family fortune. Over the years, we've tried everything we can think of to help him turn his life around, and nothing has worked. Mr. Cayce, can you tell us anything that will help us help our brother?" Well, upon hearing this, Cayce did what he always did, which is he went into trance, he went into the Akashic record, and then he said to the 2 sisters, "Your brother is the single most highly evolved soul about whom I have ever obtained information. And the 3 of you planned together before any of you were born for him to do exactly what he's been doing so that the 2 of you could learn to be more compassionate." Well, that was not exactly the response the sisters had been hoping for, but this is how it works. But because we as a society don't yet understand that this is how it works, we have all these tremendously harsh judgments of people like the brother and people in certain other categories of experience: homelessness, drug addiction, alcoholism, certain illnesses like AIDS. And what are the judgments? We say things like, these people are losers. These people need to get their act together. They need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. The judgments of people who have AIDS are particularly harsh. People say things like, he or she must have been promiscuous. He or she must not have used protection. Some people actually believe that AIDS is God's way of punishing homosexuals for being homosexuals. But I would submit to you, consider the sheer absurdity of these kinds of judgments in light of what is actually happening here. The souls who plan these kinds of challenges are tremendously courageous souls, and they're planning these challenges in part as teachers to us. They're coming in service to us. This point was so important to me that it's the reason the very first story in my first book, Your Soul's Plan, is about a man who plans to have the AIDS virus. We worked with the medium Stacy, who can go into the pre-birth planning sessions. And when we went into his pre-birth planning session, we heard the conversation he was having with another member of his soul group who was going to be the soul who would give him the AIDS virus. And what happened in that planning session is that these 2 souls were trying to choose a mission. We all have a mission that we select before we come into body. And they were being shown scenes of what life on Earth is like at this point in linear time. After they looked at these scenes, they came to the conclusion that judgment is a big problem for humanity at this point in time, and they wanted to do something about it. So the plan that they came up with is that one would give the other the AIDS virus, and then the one who contracted the virus would go about being a teacher to everybody he met. He would give everybody who met him the opportunity to put judgment aside and feel compassion in their heart. So again, we have all these very harsh judgments of people who have these kinds of experiences, and yet it takes an inordinate amount of courage to plan something like that. And they're doing it, at least in part, to be of service to us, to come in as teachers to us. So, if you're walking down the street one day, and let's say you walk past a homeless person sitting in a cardboard box on the corner, if you have a thought like, get a job, that kind of thought really misses the mark, because it's very possible that that homeless person is a very highly evolved soul, perhaps much more highly evolved than you, who was in your pre-birth planning session and who agreed to be there at that moment as you walk by. And yes, the planning is sometimes that detailed, so that you could have the opportunity to put judgment aside and feel compassion in your heart. And yet, because we don't understand that this is what is going on, we have all these very harsh judgments of these kinds of people. Let me share with you one more true story of pre-birth planning, and then I'll say some concluding remarks and then take a few questions. In the first book, Your Soul's Plan, there's a chapter about the pre-birth planning of accidents, which are not really accidents. One of the two stories in that chapter is about a woman named Christina, who is now in her 60s. She shared with me the following true story that took place when she had been in her 20s. When she was in her 20s, she was employed as an administrative assistant at a college in California. And one of her daily duties in that job was to pick up her boss's mail. The mailboxes were located in the basement of the building in which Christina worked. So on one day, just as she had done many, many times before, she descended those stairs to the basement mailboxes. But on this particular day, unbeknownst to her, somebody had planted a pipe bomb in her boss's mailbox. When she inserted her hand to retrieve the mail, the pipe bomb detonated. The force from this explosion was so great, it picked Christina up off the ground and hurled her 10 feet backwards against a concrete wall. There were 6-foot splinters of wood that were shot like arrows out of a bow into the wall around her. Two fingers were severed, both eardrums were ruptured, and flames from the explosion scorched her body from head to toe. When she got to the hospital, doctors actually had to hold magnets over her eyeballs to extract the shrapnel from the pipe. So we're talking here about a level of suffering that is almost unimaginable to you and me. Now, her recovery took 2 years and 10 reconstructive surgeries. At one point during that 2-year period, Christina was lying in her hospital bed in a tremendous amount of pain when suddenly she heard a voice inside her head, a voice that was not her own. It turns out that the force from that explosion was so great that in addition to doing a lot of damage to her body, it opened up her psychic gifts. She had become clairaudient. And the voice she heard inside her head that day, as she lay in her hospital bed in so much pain, was one of her spirit guides. The guide said to her, "You planned this." And Christina said, "Why?" Not an unreasonable question, right? And then the guide told her, and here's what he said. He said, "You wanted, before you were born, to have a lifetime as a gifted healer. And you knew pre-birth that if you could heal yourself from the devastating effects of that bomb explosion, you could then take all of that wisdom and knowledge about healing and turn it outward in service to others." And there you see that motivation of service to others that I talked about earlier. Well, this is exactly what Christina went on to do. After she recovered from the 10 reconstructive surgeries, she went back to school. She got a PhD in speech language pathology, set up a private clinical practice, and at this point in her career, she's healed literally thousands of people. She actually has the ability to go into a patient's brain energetically, by which I mean non-invasively, and restore language processing capability in people who had lost that due to stroke or accident. So we're talking here about a remarkably gifted healer. And the only reason she can do any of this is because she healed herself first from the bomb explosion. Now, when I spoke with Christina for Your Soul's Plan, she said 2 remarkable things to me. The first was, she said, Rob, I have completely forgiven the person who planted that bomb. Now think about that. This is somebody who had magnets held above her eyeballs in the hospital. And yet here she is saying in complete sincerity that she has forgiven the person who inflicted that kind of suffering on her. That in and of itself is extraordinary. But then she said something even more amazing. She said, Rob, I am deeply grateful to the person who planted that bomb. And when she says she is really, truly grateful to that person, she really and truly means it. This, to me, is one of the most amazing stories I've seen that shows what you can do with an awareness of your pre-birth plan. You can easily imagine that she could have chosen instead to be bitter and resentful for the rest of her life. She could have chosen instead to be angry for the rest of her life. She might even have chosen to devote the rest of her life to tracking down the bomber and taking revenge. But because she came into this understanding of her pre-birth plan and really worked with it over a period of years, it didn't happen overnight. She got herself to a place of total forgiveness and then to a place of total gratitude. Now, her story is unusual in that it's a bomb explosion, but she herself is not unusual. If she can do this after what she went through, then each one of you can work with an awareness of your pre-birth plan to do the same thing, to get to that place of total forgiveness and to that place of total gratitude. We can all work with an understanding of our pre-birth plan to get to forgiveness and to gratitude. Let me make a couple concluding remarks. Then I will talk about the Between Lives soul regression and then take some questions. Some of you might know, if you're familiar with my work, that originally my first book, which is now called Your Soul's Plan, was self-published under the title Courageous Souls. And then a publisher picked it up and they changed the title. The reason I titled the book Courageous Souls, it's not actually a reference to the soul, it's a reference to you and me and each person who's in body on earth. Because it takes a tremendous amount of courage to plan a lifetime on earth, and even more courage to execute the pre-birth plan once you get here. Now, I travel around a lot, giving a lot of talks and workshops. And when I say things like this, sometimes people say things like, well, Rob, how am I supposed to think of myself as courageous when I'm afraid so much of the time? There's so much fear in my life. The answer to that very good question is that each and every one of you knew before you were born that fear was going to be a big part of the package here. There was no way you could not have known that. I would submit to you that only the courageous plan fear. I'll say it again. Only the courageous plan fear. So when you have that moment of wondering what the heck you're doing here, maybe even that moment of wishing you could leave and go back home, this is the moment to, and I mean literally do this, go to a mirror, look into your own eyes, and remind yourself of who you really and truly are. Say to yourself, I am a holy, eternal, courageous soul. I'm the brave soul who left a realm of love and light and peace and joy to come here to earth to experience great challenges so that I could balance and release karma, heal, be of service to others, experience contrast, and correct false feelings or false beliefs about myself. Because in my view, that's who each and every one of you really and truly is. So that is my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you for being here tonight. Again, the website is yoursoulsplan.com. Please sign up for the newsletter if you go to the website. The newsletter contains some very good channelings that my wife does that are just filled with love and healing and wisdom. Let me briefly tell you about the Between Lives soul regression, and then I'll take some questions. The Between Lives soul regression, that is another term for something that is sometimes called an LBL, or life between lives regression. Briefly, the field of life between lives regression started in the 1990s when a hypnotist named Michael Newton, who probably some of you know of, and who has written a number of very good books, including Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls, that I recommend to all of you. He, as I understand it, was using hypnosis for fairly conventional purposes, when one day he had a client who spontaneously, without any assistance or prompting from Newton, went home. He crossed back over to the other side. And he started to describe to Newton in remarkable detail everything about our lives on the other side. He talked about the homes we create for ourselves, the games we play, the classes we take, everything about our lives on the other side. Well, Newton realized he was on to a major discovery. He shifted gears professionally, and he founded the field of what he called life between lives, or LBL regression. I call it a between lives soul regression, but it's the same thing. So what is the point in doing a between life soul regression? It's a very powerful way to find out what you planned before you were born. Just to give you an overview of the process, we start with some preliminary steps to help you relax physically and then mentally, and then I guide you into a past life. It's almost always a past life that had a big impact on the plan for your current lifetime. You experience several scenes in the past life, the last of which is the death scene. The portion of your consciousness that is having the experience leaves the body in the death scene in the past life and crosses over to the other side, which I realize might sound a little bit ominous, but there's actually nothing to it. It's very safe, easy, natural, and gentle. Probably all of you have done it hundreds, if not thousands of times already. When you get back to the other side, most likely you will be greeted by a spirit guide. You'll talk with whoever greets you about why you were shown the past life and what's important for you to know about it. And then you will ask your guide to take you to the Council of Elders, who again are the wise and loving beings who oversee the cycle of reincarnation on Earth. And when you get in front of the council, I will use an intake form that you have filled out ahead of time to prompt you to answer all the questions you have put in the intake form. And hopefully by the time the session is over, you will have an answer to every question you have asked. People comment frequently on the unconditional love they feel radiating from the council. They also comment on how the council is completely non-judgmental. So they will often say things like, I could tell that the council knew literally everything about me, including all the bad things I've done in my life, and yet they loved me completely and unconditionally anyway. So for most people, that's the first time they've experienced that kind of unconditional love since coming into body. And so it's a homecoming in a very significant way. If you go to yoursoulsplan.com, click on sessions in the main menu, scroll about halfway down, you can actually watch a video of a between lives soul regression. That would be the best way to get a sense of what it's all about. The main questions people ask are, what did I plan? Why did I make those plans? How can I fulfill my plan? And well, those are the main questions. So that's a little bit about the between lives soul regression. What questions do you have for me?
Well, just as we plan our life, do we also plan our exit?
My understanding is that everybody plans several potential exit points. And when you would take an exit point, primarily under one of two sets of circumstances, either you have completed everything you plan to do in this lifetime, in which case it's time to go home, or for some reason your soul has concluded you will not be able to do what you plan to do in this lifetime, in which case the soul is not interested in wasting energy. From the soul's perspective, it's time to start a new incarnation where you will be able to complete those pre-birth intentions.
Very interesting. We have a question from Cheryl Bing. Please give examples of how people have healed pre-birth challenge of false beliefs of powerlessness, unworthiness, and worthlessness after drawing these experiences to them and how their life was changed.
The way you heal those false beliefs, and really any false belief, is by understanding the causal chain or the causal sequence. What do I mean by that? The causal chain is that beliefs create thoughts, thoughts generate feelings, and feelings generate actions. So if you want to know what your false beliefs are, look at that causal chain. Start at the level of thought and work one step backward. How would you do that? Well, you'd have to select a thought to work with. You would want it to be something that is not a mundane thought. So, for example, the thought, I need to put gas in my car. That's a mundane thought. Examining the belief behind that thought is probably not going to tell you anything very interesting. But a good thought to work with would be something like a judgment, either of yourself or somebody else.
Mhm.
So let's say, for example, you're walking down the street and you see somebody who is dressed in a way that you think is very unsightly. And you have a thought like, ooh, somebody should call the fashion police. Stop and examine that thought. Say to yourself, okay, I've just had a judgment about the way this person is dressed. What belief must be underlying and generating that thought, that judgment? Well, obviously, you must have a belief that certain forms of dress are appropriate and good looking, and other forms of dress are inappropriate and not so good looking. Then you ask yourself, is that belief true? Well, no, clearly it's not true. It's the result of your conditioning. You might just as easily have been conditioned to believe the opposite, that the person you're seeing looks great and somebody who's dressed conventionally looks awful. So when you see that your belief is false and the result of underlying conditioning, then your thoughts start to change, and then your feelings change, and then your actions change. So it works the same way with false beliefs about powerlessness, unworthiness, or feelings of worthlessness. You work backwards in the causal chain and examine the belief that generated the thought, that generated the feeling, that generated the action. This is something you can talk to the Council of Elders about in a Between Lives soul regression, and they can help you work through it.
Because if we're attracting to ourselves what we believe, if we believe we're worthless and we're in this 3D attracting more worthlessness or people and circumstances that make us believe our truth, that we're worthless. It's up to us as a soul to stand up for ourselves and examine why we feel that way and realize that we shouldn't feel that way.
That's
Right.
exactly right. And you know what
Okay.
was interesting when I did the research for my books, a number of the people that I interviewed, and I had never heard this expression until I started interviewing people for the books, they would say to me, the universe hit me over the head with the cosmic 2x4. And what they meant by that is that the same kind of challenge kept coming back around, and usually in increasingly intense form every time.
Mhm.
So if you notice that kind of pattern in your life where the same kind of challenge keeps recurring, and particularly if it becomes increasingly intense each time it comes back,
Yeah.
that is your soul really trying to get your attention about something. And it could be something like the false feeling or false belief that you are powerless or unworthy or worthless. That kind of thing is going to get mirrored back to you again and again and again, probably in increasingly intense form, until it gets your conscious attention. And then you say, what's going on here? This same kind of challenge keeps coming back around and hitting me over the head again and again. What am I supposed to be getting out of this? And once you start asking those questions, then the answer and the healing will come to you.
Wonderful. I've heard you mention on a past talk about a collective experiences. For example, World War II. They contracted to come in, who to be the victim, who to be the charge, so on and so forth. That was their contract. I don't understand the part about when the collective goes through that experience, how it raises Earth's vibration. Is the only thing I can think of is because they're completing their contract. That's what's elevating Earth's consciousness also? Or is it because it was a collective?
It's not necessarily the completing of the contract, it's what happens as you complete the contract. And specifically, do you become more loving, more kind, more compassionate? That's basically what those experiences are trying to generate. This is what I refer to as a learning through opposites plan. A lot of people have learning through opposites life plans in which they plan to learn they plan to experience the exact opposite of what it is they want to eventually learn. So, for example, a very common life plan for somebody who wants to deepen in compassion is to plan to be born into a family, a nuclear family that will treat them with a profound lack of compassion. The absence of compassion in the external environment is intended to drive the person within, where hopefully they will cultivate self-compassion. And then once they've done that, they can take the self-compassion and turn it outward toward other people. So it's the same thing on a collective level. Something like the Holocaust is intended to drive people inward to develop self-love, self-kindness, self-compassion, and then hopefully you take those qualities and offer them in service to others.
Wonderful. And that raises the
That raises
consciousness and the
vibration.
vibration of the entire earth.
Right.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. There's a saying in the New Age community that says they go by name and gematria, but that there's only 11 times that you can incarnate. In your experience, have you found that to be true? Is there a limit to how many times you can incarnate?
I have never heard that. My understanding is that you can incarnate as many times as you would like to,
Okay.
and that there are many people, in fact, most people, will incarnate on the earth plane many, many more times than 11.
Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense. It didn't really resonate with me, but I thought I'd ask you.
Sure.
You are the expert. I have heard you mention that this whole construct was made because we're in 3D. The following the 5 steps, also the contrast and all that. Now, when we go to 5D, will all that whole process, will that change because we're more awakened? Possibly we'll remember our past lives, or do you think it'll still be carried over into 5D?
That's a very good question, and I'm not completely sure of the answer. It isn't something that I've researched yet. What I have heard here and there and been told a little bit in the channeling sessions for the books is that there will be increasingly large numbers of people coming in who remember parts of their pre-birth plan, and then later on, eventually people who come in with full remembrance of the pre-birth plan. So if that happens, then you're talking about a world population that is much more conscious than what we have currently. And those people will be able to go about learning their plan lessons in a much more conscious, much more efficient, much less painful, and much less arduous manner.
If something like this was taught in high school, just think of all the teen suicides that this would prevent.
Yeah, exactly.
Knowing that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and that they've chosen to go through that particular experience. And it's just awful. And let's hope we get a remake of the education system coming soon. Huh? Let's see, I have one more question here. You did mention that when we're asleep, we can amend our contracts. Like if we feel it's too much and we can't take it anymore, or if we feel we can do more, perhaps, we can amend the contracts we made.
You can request to have them amended, and you don't have to be asleep to do that, although that does happen in the dream state, but you can make that request while you're awake during the day as well. If you feel that whatever is going on in your life is just too much, maybe you planned too much before you were born, you can speak out loud to God or Source or your guides or any higher power as you conceive of it and say that. You can say, I feel this is a bit too much. Can we make it easier? And if it's for your highest good, that request will be granted. But that is a soul level decision. Your higher self is going to make that decision ultimately. But if it's for your highest good, it will be granted.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. Cheryl has a question. Have you found out what your own pre-birth challenges are? And are you or have you healed them, you personally?
I know a fair amount about it. One of my big lessons in this lifetime is to speak my truth courageously, but with loving kindness. And as I understand it, the reason I selected that lesson to work on, based primarily on 2 past lives in which the same thing happened. One, I was a citizen in Atlantis, and I was opposed to the atrocities the government was perpetrating, but I lacked the courage to speak out against them. And then the same thing apparently happened in Nazi Germany. I was a German citizen who was opposed to what the Nazis were doing, but again, I lacked the courage to speak out against them. And so as I was planning this lifetime, I looked at those 2 lives and I felt I need to do more in the way of speaking my truth courageously, but also with loving kindness. And that's one of the reasons I do the work I do now. It's not accepted yet as mainstream thinking. And so there is a certain amount of courage that's involved in saying to people, you planned your life and your biggest challenges before you were born. That's all part of that lesson.
Wonderful. That was a great question, Cheryl. Thank you. Last question. Can everyone be hypnotized in this process? Do you have anybody that's failed to go under?
Every hypnotist on the face of the earth has some clients who don't go into trance. If you're talking to a hypnotist you're thinking of working with and they tell you they have a 100% success rate, don't believe that and don't work with that person. I believe that everybody has the ability to do it, but some people need more practice. And it really is just a question of practice. The people who need more practice are people who are very left-brained or analytic, either by nature and or training, and also people who have difficulty relaxing deeply for whatever reason. And this is why before I do a workshop or before a client has a private session, I send everybody a recording I made of a guided meditation. And I tell them, listen to this guided meditation at least 10 times, practice at least 10 times, relaxing to the sound of my voice. Now, not everybody follows that instruction, but the people who do greatly increase the chance of going into trance.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, one of those difficult people. That's it for the questions we have. We have a question. How can we schedule a session with you?
Go to yoursoulsplan.com, click on sessions in the main menu, scroll down to the calendar, and then pick a date and time and purchase the session. Now, I will tell you, I'm booked into June of next year for private sessions. The alternative to that, which I think is a very good alternative, is to take the online workshop. We do a group between life soul regression in the online workshop. And you know, some people, I think, actually are better suited to doing it in a group, because in a private session, I ask you, what is the council saying? And you're under a certain amount of pressure to come up with some kind of an answer. In a group regression, like in the workshop, it's not interactive like that. It can't be, of course. And because you don't have to come up with a response, for some people, that makes the difference. They're able to relax more deeply, go into trance, and talk with the council. So the next workshop is September 18 and 19. If you go to the events page and click on the link, it will take you to an Eventbrite page that will tell you all about the workshop. Then you don't have to wait until June to do the regression. And there's a lot of additional content beyond the Between Lives Soul regression. And it's also a lot less expensive than a private session.
Yes, you can go to his website and sign up for a newsletter also. And there's also other resources that Rob has on there. I have linked his website in the description box below. And people are waking up, learning, and most importantly, healing with all the great work you're doing. You're really helping humanity, and really, really need that right now. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And look forward to talking with you again. Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye, Rob.
Bye-bye.
And